the club. So the last few days, the last couple of times we spoke, I mentioned how my role as the eldest son um, and being from the Middle East impacted my whole life, and how that, and understanding that relationship is so critical to understand Jesus's like his whole journey about the kingdom of God and his role in manifesting it. So, and then after we spoke last week, when I came back and I was talking with my wife, and she reminded me, she said that scenario of yours, because I mentioned the story of how growing up, my dad was constantly imparting his knowledge and his life philosophy, but most importantly in this case, his knowledge of the business that he was in, which was supplies of tools for oil fields and construction companies and so forth. So a lot of complicated engineering type stuff. And throughout me growing up, and I applied for a lot of, and I started my college in engineering, and I ended up finishing in computers and built my life in computers. And that probably explains why I did not take over my dad's business. But when I went back and I worked with my dad as he was trying to determine whether he should continue with the business or my uncle, my wife reminded me that because I went into the computers, and that's not the only reason. And the way my uncle was an engineer, my dad was not an engineer. Somehow my uncle ended up taking over the business, and my dad went and continued his career somewhere else. But then when my uncle he was doing the same thing. He was the eldest son, and his son, who was second in order, he had a daughter and a son. When his son grew up, he went and studied engineering, and he was going through the same journey. He is about, I would say, almost 10 years younger than I. So because I went to college, I did not see the evolution day to day, but he was also learning from his dad the industry and the methodology and the business. And then when he finished school, he went and worked outside of his dad's company. But then eventually he joined his dad, and he worked with him for years and years and years. And when my uncle passed, his son to this day is continuing that journey. So you can see how culturally, here I'm talking about something that was started in probably in the mid 70s with me being raised in that. And then my dad starting his business with my uncle, and me being a part of, spending a lot of time and knowledge. And now here we are, mid 70s to mid 2026. We're talking about 40, almost 50 years later, about 50 years later. That business is continuing with the firstborn son, though he's second in order, taking over that business and continuing that knowledge. And I don't know what's going to happen. He has not gotten married yet, so I don't know if somebody from the family will come and join and take over, or the business will go into some other hand. He might sell it if nobody is there. And that's part of the dynamic that I grew up with. But I wanted to share with you the rest of the story. How a firstborn son, it wasn't me in this case, but it was the partner, my uncle, is now taking over the business. And that is so Near Easterner. And that's why both myself and my cousin drove the family crazy, because I haven't had any children, and my cousin, as I said, he has not had any children yet. that it makes it for the family. It's like, who's going to continue this? Why would we squander? And I have many examples I can share with you. And that's kind of like why this resonates with me when I'm reading Jesus talk about the Father. I don't have to think too much or go read more books about it. It's intrinsic. It's in my DNA. It's in the way I was raised. So so take that and try to, I know a lot of you keep, coming back and listening to this message. That's kind of something you have to, like, over time, take for granted to understand Jesus more easily, because that's a big part of why his disciples followed him. That's why the Apostle John wrote his whole explanation of the psychology of Jesus, and why Jesus had the authority and the knowledge to impart, and why we should continue his message forward, why the message is good for the world to get. That part, the father-son relationship, is so intrinsic to Christianity, and I think it is lost. That's why in the West we move towards the Apostle Paul and the Book of Revelation and so forth, because Paul was dealing with problems and was more kind of different than Jesus in his imparting, in his teaching. And that's why I want to continue to bring this back to Jesus's focus on the family was so important, that he had a lot of parables, he told a lot of stories, and then when he spoke to people, and I know in some cases, I think I was reading earlier Luke, let me see if I can find that verse very quickly, which goes like, oh, it doesn't go against what I'm saying. Ah, I lost my place here. But the message from Jesus was, if if you don't, like, when in the case of family, I think it's important for me to cover it, because I'm telling you, Jesus was trying to describe this family relationship between him and God and all of us, because he constantly said, I am just acting as the eldest son, but I am doing something that eldest sons typically don't do, which is share the knowledge with all their brothers and sisters. That's the trick that Jesus was working with, is that he was openly telling them, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, and I'm telling you everything. What I do, you will do even better. You'll do that and better. He was constantly teaching them and getting sometimes very frustrated with them for not grasping that what he's teaching them, and then feeling confident to go experiment, learn, like healing, giving the news about the kingdom. All those things were so important to him, but he knew that he had a limited time with them to impart all of this so they can take it forward. He was investing. He wasn't sitting on a high chair in a room and having them sit at his feet and basically telling them, I'm your God, or I'm the highest thing and you'll never reach that. We humans have a tendency, and I think it's part of it is our laziness, is we want that. We want somebody to sit on top of us and be responsible for everything. Jesus was different. He was constantly putting the burden back on them. He was constantly saying, if you have a problem with somebody, you don't come to me. You go and you solve your problem with that person. You have to work on your forgiveness. You have to work on your issues. And then you can come back to the temple and give your tithe. If I send you to a village to give them the good news and they close the doors, you don't get frustrated with them. You move on. So he was constantly giving them, even down to the detail of what to carry when they went from village to village, or travel to give the good news. So that part of Jesus is important, that he's not sitting on top of the movement, that he was a humble teacher. He was imparting and investing and wanting us to continue to make the world a better place. And the part that I wanted to bring up is that he did say, if you don't set aside, okay, your mother and your father and your brothers and your sisters and carry your cross and follow me, then you cannot be one of my disciples. So why would Jesus talk about leaving the closest people in your life and setting them aside, not leaving them, setting them aside, deprioritizing them to become his disciple? That almost sounds contradictory, and I know a lot of people kind of bring that up as like, Jesus was a terrible person in that way. He wanted to tear families apart. He didn't. What he wanted is he wanted to tear the loyalties away from that tribal mindset, that family mindset, and bring it into all of humanity. He saw that the Father, when going back to Genesis, when Alaha, the Ithya Rabbah, created all of the world, all of creation, all of humankind, male and female, they say Allah created them. He wanted us to understand that that is the family. There is one set of parents or one parent. I mean, it's not, it's not in our, human language to describe what the Ithya Rabbah is, but that's the founding uh, being, the founding energy that brings us all to earth in all our shapes, in all of our history, in all of our genders, in all of everything. And then that becomes your family, because Jesus did not want us. He saw the way the Romans were and the Samaritans were and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They united against him and the scribes, but then they fought amongst each other. They had different philosophies. They had different ways of measuring good and bad. And they had a lot of hate. The Jewish people of Jesus's time, and sometimes in the writings of the Talmud and in the Torah itself and the Hebrew Bible, there is a lot of prejudice against the outsider. And he grew up in that culture, and he saw that that's tearing it internally to pieces, but also risking it, because the Romans were getting constantly upset with the Jewish people, and they were rebelling against them. As I said before, there were many messiahs. There were many people at the time of Jesus who were raising the swords and fighting with the Romans and hoping to bring back the kingdom of Solomon or the kingdom of David. They wanted to liberate themselves from the Roman rule, and at the same time they disliked the Samaritans, and they disliked the other people who settled there. They disliked even people from Nazareth because their purity was constantly questioned. And that's throughout the Jewish history. And Jesus wanted to kind of break that cycle. And because in the Hebrew Bible, that cycle is constant. We get powerful and we fight and we win, and then we lose our way, and then we, lose again, and then we rebuild and somebody saves us. And sometimes it took hundreds of years. Sometimes, in many cases, took even longer than that. He didn't want that cycle. And it's the same cycle that we're very cyclical. It's like we almost never learn. We always come up with the same idea and think, but I know how they did not do it right. I can do it better. So Jesus speaking to set apart your family, he's not moving away from the psychology of the family. He loved his mom, respected his mom, and he talked about that. That he told the scribes and the Pharisees, you change even your interpretation of the laws of Moses about caring for your parents, and you do all these things to get away from helping your parents. So he called them out on it. He was not a proponent of being bad to your family. It's the exact opposite. But he wanted your kindness, your love, your forgiveness to extend beyond just the people who are close to you. And he also used that language exactly that way. It's like, what's the difference between you and the tax collectors? They love their immediate family. They're nice to their immediate family, but you need to go beyond that. You need to understand that relationship, that we are all children of God. And the ones who will be known are the ones who are doing the good works. Peacemakers, healers, people who are just good to their community. And the way they know you is the way you love one another and the way you love your enemies. That's so powerful. That stretches, that we talk about family love and family unity, or loving the people in your church, and people you grew up with, and but once we start wandering into the world, working with different people from different backgrounds and ethnicities, people who don't look like us, who grew up in different religions and cultures, who eat different foods, and that was the beginning of the movement. As Jesus left them, he was worried, and he was very, he was telling them, you will have to go. And he started, sending them on those missions so they would practice that. But and they ran into it. And that's why we hear about speaking in tongues, because they, with their, uneducated, without their leader, and now they're on their own trying to uh, communicate this wonderful idea of the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of heaven, and they're excited about it. And they're faced with religious people from different religions, people who speak different languages, and they were so excited to share that news that, now we have the concept of speaking in tongues as if it's something like really weird. But they managed to actually communicate to them this wonderful message that Jesus of Nazareth brought to us. And the movement started spreading. So that I wanted to kind of close that topic before I dove into today's topic. And one of the things I wanted to talk about, so I'm going to be jumping, and if you have any questions, please start thinking about them, because sometimes I kind of, um, stop about 40 minutes in or so, and if I don't see questions, I typically, give you the time back. I assume that you don't have anything. So if you have any questions, please drop them into the Q&A section of Zoom. The other, so I had a question come to us on YouTube about the Sabbath, and I was preparing, as I was preparing for today's session, and that kept, nagging on me. So the Sabbath, and for some religions today, it's a very big topic, and it differentiates between different groups. I want to do something real quickly on my screen here. Okay. So the Sabbath at the time of Jesus, there was no, first, the concept of the Sabbath. The Sabbath, when God created, we're told in Genesis, as if God is somebody who has arms and needs a break and sweats and gets tired. But the creation story as it goes is that God created a bunch of things over the first 6 days of the week. And then on the seventh day, God stopped the creation process and decided that that's my day to relax. Now, culturally, until Moses, people worked every day. They had no concept of taking a day off. If you farmed, you had to go out and tend to your farm, plant if you're planting, get the weeds out, water, harvest when it's time to harvest. That you then go like, oh, it's Saturday, I'm not going to harvest. I'll wait until Monday and things will die on the vine, or get overripe or whatever. People just worked every day. And when Moses came to be nice to his tribes, because Moses is now creating from a tribal culture that, it's the same, like shepherds. They went out every day and came out every day. Sheep doesn't know it's a Saturday. I can't go graze. But Moses saw that that's taxing his people, took that story of Genesis and declared Saturday to be a sacred day for people to just worship, take care of themselves, visit, spend time with the family, do something other than actually feel obliged to work. Now, with that said, I am sure that their shepherds, took care of their sheep, and nobody, frowned upon them. The sheep still needs to go, drink water and graze. And same thing, if you had some ripe plants, nobody judged you when you went and took care of it. Now, eventually, not to break the Sabbath, laws started being introduced, like you do not do things that you shouldn't be doing, or you can do some other time on the Sabbath. So, and that by the time Jesus came 2000 years later, the Sabbath became a burden. And the religious, because now you're developing into a religion beyond just the laws of Moses. People, who are full time into the religion came up with more and more and more rules of what you can and can't do on the Sabbath. And we see that a lot in Jesus's ministry. They were walking through a field, and his apostles picked up some wheat and went like this, which is what you do when you pick up wheat that's ready to be eaten, and you flake off the skin, and you eat it. Or if you are walking by an orchard of some type of fruits, and there are a lot of those in Palestine, you could pick a couple things to eat. They don't want you to steal, but as a passerby, picking some couple figs or couple peaches or apples or something, and eating it. So remember, the apostles and Jesus himself were transient. They were constantly traveling between places. So when they saw a tree with fruit, and it's that time of the year, they knew, when that is, they hit it and they grabbed a couple pieces and ate it. And they were, constantly questioned by the Pharisees and the scribes about hey, you're picking fruit. You shouldn't pick fruit. Oh, you ate fruit. We didn't wash your hands. We have rules for that too. So they were constantly like antagonizing them. And Jesus was always had a response, and he was sick of them judging the Sabbath. So I'm going to go, hopefully I'll have time to get into Luke. But in Luke, like around chapters 12, 13, 14, you'll see that tension between Jesus and the Pharisees. And it's like was on a Sabbath, and Jesus healed somebody who needed healing, and they were murmuring, talking about it. And it's like, if your ox fell in a ditch, you would not even think about it. You go pick it up. You wouldn't leave it in the ditch. And so Sabbath became an important part of religion ultimately. And the question that I received is like, when did the Christians kind of leave the idea of the Sabbath being Saturday and started practicing Sunday? In the early, so until Jesus' death, the Sabbath was the Sabbath. It was Saturday. And as I said, Jesus was breaking a lot of the rules of the Sabbath to ensure that it goes back to us being honored and appreciated, and get to do what we want to do, as long as not burdensome or dictated on us by somebody else. Now, when Jesus died, the story is that he was resurrected on Sunday. So, and it's if you read it again, if you read it like literally and write down the dates, it doesn't add up the third day, because Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it's not like he, technically he should have been Monday, but the way they count. Anyway, he was, the resurrection happened on a Sunday. And some people started, after Jesus' death, started celebrating and praying on Sunday in honoring Jesus' resurrection. And that took a while. so they're still observing the Sabbath, but also started praying. Then slowly they started kind of more focusing on that to differentiate themselves. And there are some communities that to this day that still observe the Sabbath as the holy day. And somewhere, so I think we have some writings from like 150 AD where they're saying, okay, people are doing more prayer on Sunday as a prayer day, not dismissing the Sabbath. And then later, Constantine, God bless him, he did a lot of things to take away from Eastern Christianity, but I don't think his intent was that. He declared Sunday as like an important day for the Christians, and like 321 around the Nicene Council time. So slowly that separation, that differentiation started taking more hold and over time. So if you care about the Sabbath, that's the story about it. Ultimately, we owe ourselves a time to pray, to meditate, to regenerate. And I'm seeing some places in the world that now Friday slowly joining the Saturday and the Sunday, which is in the three Abrahamic-based religions, that the Friday is the holy day for the Muslims. So now we have 3-day weekends in some places of the world that they start with like half days and then slowly become incorporated. So I think with the technology advancing and with the global economy and people having to work different hours because of the working with places all over the world, I think slowly we're going to see a 4-day work week and a 3-day Sabbath or break. And ultimately, if we feel that this is what's good for us, forget religion. God is not somebody who's going to write laws like that. We make those laws up. So hopefully that answers that question. And if you have any other comments or questions about that, happy to address them at the end. Okay, those are the two things I wanted to get off. Let's see how we're doing. Okay, I have 15 minutes. I'm not going to get to everything I wanted to get to. Okay, so I'm going to Luke chapter 15, and I might, we'll continue the next time I speak. I'll cover a couple things here. Then the tax collectors and sinners drew near to him. So I'm jumping into Luke to hear him. So tax collectors and sinners. That these are really bad people you don't want to associate with, and they are the ones who come to him. But who else was there? And the scribes and Pharisees murmured, saying, "He receives even the sinners and eats with them." See what he said about they constantly antagonized Jesus. They didn't like the company he keeps. If he drank, they called him a drinker. If he hung out with the sinners, they called him, they called him out on it and said, why would who would want to hang out with these people? So here in Luke, I like Luke because it has a lot of like what we call parables. He's constantly giving stories that people could remember and then carry forward. And a lot that's the beginning of the ministry. There are no printouts. There are no, I have no notes to take and books to carry. He had nothing. Jesus was just speaking, and he knew if he was going to, if his message of the kingdom was going to continue, he needed to give a lot of impart a lot of the knowledge orally for the people to carry it forward. So Jesus told them the parable. That's what's clearly. Whoops. What man among you has 100 sheep, and if one of them should get lost, would he not leave the 99 in the open and go in search of the one which is lost until he finds it? So Jesus here, I mean, it's an obvious, where the Eastern psychology comes in, 100 was a very important number. And you work really hard as a shepherd or an owner of a flock to get to that. Now, that number is like, mind blowing and, 2000 years ago. And these again, people couldn't count a lot of them to 100. So when you when you hit 100, if you lost one, you're now at 99, which is not good. You have to work your way. So part of this, that's not the essence of the story, but that's why he set it up this way. 99 sheep. Oh my God, my dad and I worked on getting to 100 for years, and now we lost one. And that last one is his definition of what they're accusing him of doing. And when he finds it, he rejoices and takes it on his shoulder. And then I've seen shepherds. I grew when I was a little boy, growing up in Libya. I've seen shepherds who would like be, stopping the traffic and crossing. And sometimes they would take the little sheep, especially if one was born like in the spring, during that trip. He would carry that one on their neck. So who would take it on his shoulders, and he comes to his house and invites his friends and neighbors and say to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost." I say to you that such will be the joy in heaven over one sinner who repents more than over 99 righteous who need no repentance. So the do you see how big of a deal? And this again, this is culture. These people are going like, "Oh my God, 100, and you lose the one that got you to 100. He didn't have 101." He's like, so it's a big round number. It's a good number, and but what Jesus is talking about here is like, if you're good, you're expected to be good. There is your reward is that you live a happy. When you're good, you have no worries. And that's why when a community sees somebody who lost their way, and I know the words sinners it's heavy. It's people who lost their way, people who maybe lost a job and could not recover quickly enough to get back on their feet and lost their home. We see that in our community all the time, and I think a lot of the media it makes it look like it's like, don't go to LA. It's a bad place. A lot of homeless people. And our town, we have no issues. Or if we find an issue, we put it on a bus and we send it to LA. So what, and these are a lot of good Christians who tell me these types of things, or you see them on a lot of the righteous networks. What we're talking about here, Jesus is like, it's so important for the people of the kingdom to care for the people who lost their way. And if you start by loving them and by lending them a hand and treating them like that very precious 100th sheep that lost its way, and we as a community need to bring them back and get them on their feet and get them back into the flock. That's the psychology of the kingdom. That's how the kingdom thrives, is by picking up the people. And the good people, they're not ignored, they're not unimportant, but that's what is expected. We should be good. It's like I don't know which comedian it was like, he said something like, I don't beat my kids, a friend of his said, and it's like, what, you want a cookie? So and this is I don't know, 1999 comedy in the US. Jesus 2000 years ago is like 99 good sheep and not lost sheep. They're doing their part in the kingdom. That's great. That's what's expected. But when we lose one, we all get together and go after it and bring it back into the fold and care for it. So I love the simplicity of Jesus. And there is another one. Or what woman who has 10 coins, again, a whole number, so he's using these whole numbers, like, how hard it is to get in the time of Jesus for a woman to save and save and save and save and go get a coin and add it to her little collection, little hidden stash of coins for a bad day or something special she's planning for. and should lose one of them, has 10 coins, lose one of them, would not light a lamp and sweep the house and search for it carefully until she finds it. Again, to us, okay, my wife and I live alone. If we misplace something, we go looking for it, and typically we can find it, or we'll find it one day. But imagine if we lose a coin while living, in the case of this woman, most likely her children and their wives and their husbands, and well, typically wives, the other children, their friends coming and going, that the grandkids, everybody is in the house. And when she goes into her stash and goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, oh my God, one is missing. And she goes about it, storms out of her room and lights the candle, or the little oil lamp, and looks under all the furniture. Furniture is like, probably rugs and big platters and things like that. Looking underneath and under all of them, trying to find that coin is so important, and getting to 10 is important. And of course, the implication is that somebody took my coin in the house. And I bet you, I think Dr. Errico has ran into that with Dr. Lamza. But so if I tell you I lost something precious while you're with me, that the implication is that if you don't help me find it, most likely you took it. And that's why Jesus continues this story saying, and when she finds it, so she does find it. Now, everybody was accused. The grandkids were accused, probably innocently playing, maybe grabbed it, played with it and placed it somewhere. The older people, ooh, that's almost theft. And when she finds it, she calls her women friends and neighbors and says to them, rejoice with me. So again, just like the man who found his very precious 100th sheep, and because it's a status, he calls all his friends and throws a party. Same thing with the woman. Here is to probably tell everybody, okay, I know you didn't do it. It was truly misplaced. Rejoice with me, for I have found my coin, which was lost. I say to you that such will be the joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. And remember, angels in Aramaic is not winged, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, Scandinavian harp-playing beings. These are the messengers. These are the messengers of the kingdom. The message goes wild when we say, hey, blah, who was lost to us, is now back, is in the fold again. He or she is whole again. They're eating better. They feel that they belong. They feel supported. That's the kingdom, is caring for everybody. And I really, really wanted to go into the next story, but I think I am pushing my time. So you know what the heck? Because it's on topic. So that's the what Jesus is trying to implement with the kingdom. Now he goes into something else, which is one of his family. Now, a lot of these are family-based parables. The woman in the house losing the coin, most like, I mean, he's talking about communal living. And when something like that happens, so he's creating a lot of stress in these very short 2 verses. So, but he's like, okay, people will remember that. Now he introduces something that's very, the first sentence that he throws out there brings up a whole bunch of feelings in his crowd. And he goes, and Jesus said to them again, okay, so he's on a roll. I think the writer of Luke is gathering all this. A man had 2 sons. See, that we call this the prodigal son story, but the way Eastern people refer to it, at least historically, because slowly the propaganda made it even to the East. A lot of the parables were titled based on the first line. So a man had two sons. To us in the West, okay, for people of the East, people who know the Torah, you're thinking about Isaac and Abraham. Sorry, Isaac and Ishmael, the sons of Abraham. Thinking about Cain and Abel. You're thinking about, um, I'm getting a lot of messages here, make sure. Okay. Um, you're thinking about all these brothers, Jacob and Esau. Tension. Tension is instant. What did Cain and Abel do? He killed the brother. What did Ishmael and Isaac do? Ishmael got kicked out according to the Torah. In the Islamic story, Ishmael traveled with Abraham and built what we know today as the Kaaba. And he was his firstborn and blessed and started the nation that became the Ishmaelites, who became, a lot of them became the Arabs and the Muslims. So brothers in the Bible, and the Esau Jacob story is really interesting because in a lot of them, so Esau and Jacob, Esau was the firstborn son who was supposed to inherit everything. Jacob stole that from him. In the Hebrew Bible, Isaac, who was the younger son of Abraham, ends up, because he's from Abraham's first wife, though he came second, he ended up inheriting the blessing of Abraham according to the Jewish tradition, or the Torah tradition. So in the Near East, that relationship between the eldest son and the second son, or two brothers in general, is very intense. And I think we like, for those of you who watch TV, shows like Succession on HBO, which is huge, and I don't know how many seasons they have. It has that built-in tension between the siblings. The daughters have a role there. In the Near East, you almost never hear about the daughters because that's part of the culture. You just don't talk about it. And they typically, because a lot of them were viewed as property, they moved on to the husband's family, and they lived in that house and so forth. So um, so now when Jesus says a man had two sons, all the listeners, because we know that the crowd is tax collectors. Who are they? Tax collectors and sinners, scribes and Pharisees. They're all now pulling on their beard and going like, "Uh-oh, what is he gonna?" He just gave us the story of the lost sheep and the lost coin, and now he's bringing more tension with two sons. And I really feel like I should give this more time. So if you have any questions, please drop them into, let me look and see if any questions came. I see one in the Q&A. Great. So I have one message. I believe it was God's plan for Jesus to die by crucifixion. Is that true? If so, does he ever plan tragic events for us in order to accomplish a purpose of his? Um, well, I think my answer, my belief, just based on studying Jesus for almost 30 years straight now, is that no, God loves his children. God only knows to love the children. That's according to Jesus. Jesus in Matthew says that his sun shines on the good and the wicked, his rain falls on the good and the wicked. Everybody gets blessed by the rain. Or if you plant, God doesn't judge your actions. You get to harvest regardless. So whether you're good or bad, for God, you are a child of God, you are cared for. So when we look at the actual episode when Jesus gets crucified, and how his ministry actually developed and how he was dealing with that development is that he knew that there is a point. I mean, whether he dies naturally or accidentally or gets arrested and judged, thrown in jail, because he saw also like his cousin John the Baptizer. He ended up he led almost a rebellion, a spiritual rebellion. You know, he wasn't armed or sending people with swords and arrows at Herod, but he spoke against authority, and therefore he paid a price, and eventually they actually chopped his head off. So Jesus knew the risk of being a minister, but he gambled on that. His approach of all inclusiveness, on love, that's the way the world is going to change. And he knew he was taking a risk. And he spoke about it. He said, like, don't fear the people who will take your life away. Fear the people who will actually oppress you and scare you. Fear itself is the worst thing. Being afraid is the worst thing. So he reached a point where he was not afraid. He said, death does not scare me. I'm going to live my life to its fullest, and I'm going to live it from a place I know is right. And that he picked up from the culture. He picked up from the Hebrew Bible, from the studying the Torah, all the way from Genesis to all the prophets, and he had a great grasp on it. Even his enemies were constantly questioning. It's like, where does he get his authority? He did not come to our school. Yeah, he studied with the village rabbi in Nazareth, like all Jewish kids at his time, and he did his all the required tasks. But where is this knowledge coming from? And as I said, he was simple too, because he was from Nazareth. Nazareth is not as complicated as a city like Jerusalem was, with the Roman seat and the temple being there and so forth. So let me see what you said. It's like in God's plan for Jesus to die on the cross. The death on the cross is so agonizing and painful and horrible. What father would want one of his children, any of his children, to experience crucifixion? That's such a horrible idea. And you see it, by the way, crucifixion wasn't exclusive to the Romans. You can read it in the Hebrew Bible. They crucified as well. They hung people and hammered them into trees and let them suffer and die slowly like that. So that cruelty was around, and the Romans were using it to scare people from rebelling against them. So no, I don't think a loving father, the father of the way Jesus describes the Awa, the Alaha, this beloved Ithia Rabba that created all of us in their image and likeness, would actually put one of us through that misery on purpose or for any reason. So the answer is absolutely not in my belief system. Now, Jesus had a choice, and he could have he had a chance to run away the night prior to his arrest and the trial and all the way to the cross. But he knew that if he ran away, he would have been all his teachings to his disciples and apostles would have been lost, because then now he's an outlaw hiding in some hill, and the movement would have just dissipated. So he took a gamble. Maybe not in my opinion, was not a great gamble, but at least he stayed true to his teachings all the way to the last breath he took on the cross. He did not condemn the people who arrested him. He did not let his disciples and apostles save him by using weapons. One of them tried, and he said, "Nope, you use the sword. This whole movement changes." And so you use the sword, you die by the sword. We're not going to put it away. One of them brought a sword. So he accepted that there is a risk, and he felt he delivered the message, and I'm sure he wanted to live a lovely long life, but it was cut short because bad people were fearing what he was doing. They were fearing his effect on the community. They were fearing his effect on the Roman relationships. So and they and because he was challenging the Sabbath, he was challenging the taxation. And he was like taking the fear out of it. Like he did not speak against taxes because he knew that would end his life. Instead, he said, "Look, the coin has Caesar's picture on it. Give it to the Romans. It's their invention. Money is not a God invention, it's a human invention. And they use it to control people. Just don't debate it. Don't risk your life. Don't have them come and break your door and take stuff out of your house and punish your family. Give them their share. Stop that resistance. Now, at the time of Jesus, taxation was very hard on people because they were taxed by the Romans and they were taxed by the um, the temple, the Jewish people, and the tax collectors had to make a living on top of that. So they took more than the tax amounts because they had to. That's how they got paid. So Jesus was wanted to live, loved life and lived life to its fullest and was very generous with his time, was very generous with his healing, though he didn't really want to do a lot of healing. But they brought him the sick people and he did not turn them away. And he took his time when he needed it, with not just on the Sabbath. He stepped away to regenerate. He was just a really good man and a really good teacher, a very good example of what God would want all of us to be like. And that's I don't think there is. I think the movement benefited, and I think the Eastern thinking of a martyr, which is to this day part of the culture. And you see, if you watch the news, maybe not the main media, but everybody who gets killed by the U.S. and Iran, everybody who gets killed by Iran in the Middle East, everybody who gets killed in Palestine by Israelis, they are automatically they receive that very honored title of martyr because they died for a just cause in the opinion. And then once you have the martyr, then you have a lot of benefits that go with it, if depending on your religion. So he then became, and I think it weakened the movement, to be honest. It kind of it strengthened it in that they gathered around the idea of his martyrdom and continued his message. And that's how the early movement kind of got its energy and moved out. But also, it suffered from making him extra special. Now, as I said, Gaza had almost over 100,000, if not more, martyrs in the last 2 years. A lot of them we won't know their names because they haven't found them yet. But then in Jesus's case, it was a special one guy that elevated to that state. So the movement benefited. The church wants us to believe in it. I mean, we see a lot of crucifixes in churches on people's uh, chests, on medallions, on T-shirts, on the corners of a lot of the streets that have a mega church on it. So then the whole thing kind of shifted in a way away from these simple teachings that I've been sharing with you. I hope that answers your question. It was two parts. Does he ever plan tragic events? No, God never, nature does its thing, nothing for us. Illness is a part of what we do with our bodies and our diets and so forth. I'm not blaming us for it. It's like we're ignorant sometimes, so we do things, we use paints that hurt us, thinking they look great, or we use asbestos because it has great qualities, but then we end up with lung disease. I mean, we do as we learn that that's bad, and we stop doing it, which is great. And then the next generation benefits from no asbestos anywhere where they live. At least in civilized countries. Some other countries have not really gotten the memo, or they don't have the funds to change things. So no, God never puts obstacle. We put obstacles, and sometimes nature does too. And we some of it is also our choice. And Jesus used some of that. It's like if you build a house on the hill versus if you build a house, and where it can be ruined. So there are things we know. Put the house on a good foundation, it's not going to be affected by an earthquake. Put it away from flood zones, it's not going to be covered in water. But then there are some people who are poor and they'll take a chance and that's the only place they can put their house. And sometimes they live 100 years without a flood, and then it could be 2 years into it, something happens to the house by nature. So we create that, and sometimes we want to point at God and say, "Oh, you see, those are bad people. That happened to them." A lot of buildings don't fall in earthquakes because they're built to code, and then there are buildings that were built poorly for whatever reason, or they're just in a bad spot that was not analyzed well enough, and they collapse. So God loves us. God absolutely loves us, and that's the message of Jesus. God loves us in an unlimited way. And when I get into the prodigal son, we'll see that how God loves us anyway. How do we understand the wrath of God and the sacrifice of Jesus? No such thing. Jesus never talked about the wrath of God. Jesus talks about a lot of ways that we judge each other, that we end up paying for errors that we make, usually against society. But God does not put people in place. Because, if you think about, like, let's say Jesus' crucifixion was an example of, that God wanting us to, wanting Jesus to be martyred. He would have had, the God would have ordered or got the minds of the Romans, Pilate, all the temple people, temple leadership, and all their minions, the people who, the guards and so forth, who went and arrested Jesus and brought him in and had a very bad trial and had split hair with how to accuse him, and you said this and you said that, and then got Roman soldiers to carry him and make an example of him and put him on the cross. It's that's not God's business. God gave us a beautiful earth that's a wonderful place in the universe, and told us to take care of it and take care of all its creatures, and take care of one another. And by the time Jesus came, he saw how badly we are doing, so he put himself on the line to try to course correct some of this and re-explain the whole idea of God's family, and we're all from one family, and we all should be working together and loving one another. We shouldn't have enemies and so forth. So God, and I know if you go to the Hebrew Bible, you'll see examples, and you'll see examples of almost this duality of God. Jesus took the duality out completely. And the prophets had an inclination, in almost all of them, if you read the prophets, and they struggled with Moses and his laws. And the judges, when you read the judges and how they treated their kings and so forth, they knew what goodness is, and they knew that the burden on them. The reason they were even viewed, because I had a question from a few weeks ago about, are there chosen people, and are the Jewish people the chosen people, the people of the Hebrew Bible? They were chosen for something. They were chosen to take this concept of Alaha, Elohim, the Ithya Rabbah, and replace the existing belief systems with this goodness. Jesus took it to the apex. Jesus really grasped it, and he took away any of the other noise. And his trick was that loving your enemy. That was one of his key shifts. He brought it back, and it's like, no, we can't have enemies. The prophets fell for that. So more often than not, when you're reading the prophets, they had a position in the government. They were advisors to the king. They were politicians. They had a role to play for the tribe or for the king, or for whatever stage we're talking about in their history, the tribal history. So they had their loyalty to the system, that sometimes when somebody, the Philistines, the Canaanites, the whatever Edomites encroached on them or initiated some problem, or they wanted to expand, or they had this other duality. It's the same duality I used to speak about a lot. It's like the same duality that is often demanded of us when we go into like the workforce. My God, I'm 2 minutes after 8 your Eastern time. So Jesus took that duality out. Jesus only focused on God the good. And that's why we have God in English is came from God. So when they were asking, what is this God of yours? When they made it to Europe, it's like he's good, just pure goodness. There is no, wrath. There is no setting up Jesus, his own beloved son, to die a horrible death. And for what reason? And it's like Jesus was just giving us this kingdom. Repent. Jesus said, repent. He didn't say, believe in my blood. He didn't say, pray this way, pray that way. He just said, turn to God, turn to God's ways. God's way is loving. God's way is forgiving. God's way is warm. It makes you. It's no fear, no enemies. That's Jesus. Anyway, I have, I think, one more question. I probably will address it next time. Thank you so much for spending your Wednesday evening with me. Thank you for your contributions and support of the foundation. We appreciate your love offering. It keeps us going. And until next week, which I think Rabbi Eriko will be speaking to you. Till then, have a lovely evening.